G'day Internet, it's that time again, another build rundown. And this time we've got a signature series. This XS650 was given to us with complete creative control. So we took the vintage styling of it, upped the ante on everything we could, and turned out this amazing custom. Let me take you through just what we've done. As I mentioned before, this is a really special build with us with a lot of intricate detail. I really wanted to go the extra mile for our client Paul on this one. So I'll start from end to end so we don't miss anything. On the rear wheel, we've simplified the brake linkage, put a cable brake on here that works with our rear sets that we've fitted. And these Marchesini shocks actually came with the bike. So there's a bit of history with this motorcycle. It used to be raced in the 70s and Paul's grandfather owned it. So he had it for a while, used to do a bit of street racing on it and bragged to his grandkids about, which is how Paul knew about the bike. And years later, the bike had changed hands, but Paul actually managed to track it down and buy it back and then send it to us to be revamped. So we wanted to keep a bit of that racing stuff. These are really good shock absorbers that we used back in the day. So we had them stripped and completely rebuilt, new chrome springs by our mates at Ride Dynamics. Then we custom fabricated some new top shock mounting points for the shortened frame on this thing. So a lot of the time when you put rear sets on these old bikes, you almost have to do away with the Kickstarter because everything just fouls up. Once we'd fabricated our custom foot peg brackets, I had to modify the Kickstarter so everything clears. I wanted to make sure that we could use it because if you want to look good in front of your mates when you're leaving the pub, you don't want to be hitting the electric start on a vintage bike. So this thing, you flip up the foot peg and the Kickstarter clears nicely. It just was a matter of cutting this off and rerouting it. And once you tuck it back up in there, you'd never really know the difference. On the tail section, I wanted to try something a little bit different. So instead of putting a standard cafe racer tail hoop on and using that to mount the tail cowl to, we went about it a different way. What I did was bob the frame and finish it off nicely and then put a sheet metal plate underneath here to finish off the racer tail that we built. All of this is mounted up by some hidden tube work on the back of the frame. That houses a few bits and pieces of the electric, but it wasn't big enough to hide our battery, so all of that stuff's built in underneath the swing arm. Finishing up the tail, we've got an integrated LED brake light that's tucked into the cowl and a set of our 3-in-1 hollow tip indicators nicely mounted on the top shock mount. Another really key piece of detail on this bike, I had an idea to bring the twin carbies into a single sort of airbox plenum. What I've done here is use some aluminium tubing to fabricate up a nice 2-into-1 collector that runs into a custom-made DNA pod filter. The boys absolutely knocked this out of the park for me. I'm really happy to have those guys in my corner doing projects like this. So I contacted Marios and his dad and they made me a one-off pod filter for this thing, embellished with the DNA and purpose-built Moto logo. All this stuff has been nickel plated with some really clean stainless steel bracketry to mount it onto the frame and keep it tight on the carbs. So now I'll get into a bit of the performance mods that we've done on this thing to bring back the glory days of this XS's racing history. We went with a Who's Racing 700cc kit and a Shell #1 cam, a setup that's sort of recommended for a lot of sort of performance road riding, as I'll put it. This thing's not going to be really tracked, if ever, but we wanted to make sure that when you twist the throttle, you're going to know about it. So the racing kit was put in there, bought that over from the US. We've got a setup of some Mikuni round slide VM34 carburettors, a couple of the really custom pieces done in this. We've got a heavy duty clutch on the other side, and we've also done a hydraulic clutch conversion. This one was a real pain to set up. So what I've done is used a Ducati clutch slave cylinder on the side here, and we did a lot of fab work on this case to accept that, and that pushes the standard clutch shaft. We've got some heavy duty springs and some nice performance clutch plates in that. Finishing out the engine is a custom-made exhaust. What we've done here is take a twin system into a nice X pipe that's hidden underneath the motor and then split out into two mufflers that keeps it nice and symmetrical looking from the rear. This is all custom fabricated and hand polished in-house. The tank is another one of the custom pieces that was left over from when Paul's grandfather owned the bike. At one point in time, it was fitted with a pop-up cap off a more modern bike, so we chose to retain that. The seats being custom made, of course, hiding a few of the electrics, including the black box underneath there and the tail cowl, all seamlessly flowing through. I really love the shape of this bike, especially because we chose to finish it off with a really nice bikini fairing on the front here. Hidden in behind the bikini fairing is an absolutely pivotal piece of this build, something that I was really stoked. We've got some Seirani racing forks on this thing and custom triple clamps. The custom triple clamps house a bracket that hold the bikini fairing, as well as a couple of really nice and neat Daytona gauges underneath the windscreen here. The clip-ons have been set up with all the fruit. We've got the handmade leather grips, purpose-built Moto switches, and a set of super nice Akasato levers. These things have just been added to our online store. We've been using them a lot on builds, and I figure it's about time that we added that sort of thing to our range. Really recommend them, they're a great bit of gear. I'm always really stoked when I get to work with a front fairing. I just think they add such a nice element to a build, especially one that's sort of vintage and as classy as this old thing. So I wanted to make sure I did something pretty special with it. Using our 4.5-inch flashpoint headlight, I've mounted it off center on here and then hand fabricated a nice aluminium eyelid that mounts it up onto the fender. There's no visible sort of mounting on this side, it's all sort of hidden in behind there, but this is a really key piece of the project just to give it a bit of flair. Another really awesome piece on this bike, and I know I've been saying that a lot with this video, but stick with me, it does get good here. So this Seirani front end is sort of a replica racing front end that a lot of guys used to use back in the day, and we've matched it up with a replica Robinson quad leading shoe drum brake. This thing I really wanted to include. We've never done a massive drum on any of our builds before, but being who I am, I couldn't leave it just be operated by a standard lever and cable setup. So I decided to make the thing go hydraulic. We've done this by fabricating some nice brackets that you don't even really notice mounted onto the forks that house two slave cylinders that actuate with the front brake lever. The two slave cylinders pull on the front drum brake. This sort of setup delivers an unbelievable feel for a drum brake. You get none of the cable stretch or slack that you get with this sort of standard setup. Fixes a lot of dramas that they used to have. So the front brake feel on this bike is absolutely incredible, and looking at it is really nice too. What I did here was house all the hydraulics in behind this single stainless steel plate here. Obviously fabricated all that up, finished it back and polished it up super nice, so it just sort of blends in with this super shiny wheel here. The wheels on the bike were also resized. So with the Robinson drum brake, we've had it wrapped in an 18-inch Valance Barani rim and the same on the rear. So we're running 18s front and back. I think it just looks a bit sharper than the 18-19 that these things come standard with. It also lowers the front a bit, gives it a bit more of that racy feel. When it came to the front fender, there was enough crazy stuff on this bike, so I decided to keep it super simple, nice and clean. Used our aluminium fender and the DIY fender kit, made up some nice clean brackets, M5 screws, got it nickel plated, and that was that. Now the last thing that I want to show you, and I promise the last thing, a little detail before we get into the paintwork, is this little engine bracket that I whipped up one afternoon. So XSs have this super ugly bracket that normally sits at the front of the engine. It's a bit of an eyesore. A lot of guys replace it. What we chose to do was box this in, and I hand cut out a little purpose-built Moto logo, had it nickel plated. Voila, she turned out beautiful. All right, now finishing everything off on this bike, we had to make sure that all the hard work that we did on this thing didn't go without a killer paint job. Now we've moved shop since we started this project, and just down the street from us now is a really unbelievable painter that I was stoked to work with, Nathan from Live and Loco. So I went down there, we got mixing up some paints. He did us a custom grey silver paint, and then we accented everything with this super nice mix of a candy teal and a candy blue. He's also shadowed the PBM signature on the tank there, as we do with all of our signature series builds. Really happy with this paint job. Nathan and I dreamed up this little variation on the Yamaha speed block that really ties the front to the back, and a few little touches of that nice candy teal blue really set the whole thing off. That'll about wrap it up for the Signature Series XS650. I hope you liked the video. I'm gonna give this thing a little startup and take it out for a nice, leisurely ride. Finally, this is the part where your favourite YouTuber is going to ask you to subscribe to their Patreon. Luckily for you, we're not YouTubers. We're bike builders and parts makers. So if you like the content we create and the bikes we build, or you hate both of those things and just want to grab some gear for your next project, make sure you show your support, jump on our online store and give your bike that purpose-built Moto touch. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.